Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. On behalf of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, I just want to extend a warm welcome to everybody who's come out today to be part of this panel discussion and this conversation around uncovering legacy burdens of racism. We're really excited about having this conversation with all of you today. This event is a community event that's offered through the foundation intervention. So if you actually go onto the foundation's website, you'll see a section that has intervention, and there's a lot of community organized discussions that are great, and this falls under that same program. This program is going to help us deal with internal issues that may be triggered, particularly now, what's happening in the world. And so we look forward to starting the conversation with everybody today as we begin this panel. I'm Requina Barnes. It's nice to be here. I will be the moderator for the discussion today as far as working with the panelists and having conversations with the panelists. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a social worker, LICSW. Boston, Massachusetts is where I'm located. I'm an IFS therapist. I'm also the VP of Black Therapists Rock, and the founder's Donna Young. She's actually a panelist today, which I'll be introducing shortly. As a person of color, it's great just to be here having this conversation with everybody. And I'm also a board member for the Foundation of Self-Leadership. So before we get started, I just want to kind of give some context in some logistical areas. Let's see. So as we're talking about having this conversation about legacy burdens around racism, just thinking about the social inequity, the injustice, and the justice, right? It's like a combination of both that have happened in our world for centuries. This is not new, but it's great to be part of a community where we can start to have these conversations. And just thinking about the emotional injury and the trauma, right? Like the racial trauma that a lot of this has caused and continues to cause amongst people in the world, particularly people of color. So each of us, respond to it in our own way. And as we have this discussion, just thinking about reflecting on our own parts and what might come up for us, right? Me included. Right, as we're talking about racism and how it affects us or how we've affected other people, just thinking about our own parts. And so just wanted to let everybody know, as far as the panel today, it will be recorded. A few people asked me if the panel is going to be recorded. So yes, this is being recorded for people to view who either couldn't join us today or, want to see it at another time. So that is actually going to be available on the Foundation's YouTube channel and website. And whoever registered for the panel will also get an email letting you know when it will be available. Hi, Liz. I'm seeing some people pop up in the chat. Nice to see people in the community and people who I know from different walks of life. So as we're going forth with this discussion, I just invite people, if you have any questions, to pose them in the Q&A box. Myself and Deran will be kind of facilitating the discussion with the Q&A. Hello, Maria. So nice to see everybody. I feel your energy. So it's great. And as I close, and before I introduce the panelists, I just want to say, this is a very engaging conversation. Feel free to participate. The Center for Self-Leadership or Foundation for Self-Leadership, all these acronyms. We just want to thank you for coming. The Foundation wants to thank you for coming. Stay tuned. We invite people to stay engaged and just speak your truth, right? Pay attention to your parts and speak your truth. So as we get started, let's get started. Hello, Barbara. Hello, Michelle. I'm feeling everybody's energy in the room. It's great. So let me introduce all the panelists. So again, myself, I'll be the moderator for today. And just a little blurb about myself. I am a social worker, but my specialty is relationship, trauma, and attachment. I have a private practice. I work with men, women, and couples of color, which I love. I'm also a board member of the foundation, and I teach as well at 2 different universities. So that's a little bit about me. The first panelist is Chris Burris. He's actually a senior trainer in IFS. He serves on the diversity community. He has an active clinical practice. He focuses on social engagement, diversity issues, and he is a great trainer. I've taken a training with him before, and he's also very, very engaged in conversations of social justice, you know, racism. He always shows up for the conversation and just speaks his truth. He's an awesome, awesome person. So that's the first panelist, Chris Burris. The next one is Fatima Finney. She's a IFS therapist, a yoga instructor. She provides therapy and workshops in yoga as well. She has a private practice in Boston, Massachusetts, and she's passionate about helping underserved communities access mental health. She also is an awesome person who I've gotten a chance to work with. We PA'd before in trainings. So Fatima's also a woman of color, and she will be joining us on the panel. That's the next panelist. The next panelist is Nancy Sowell, another awesome soul. She's a senior lead training in IFS. She teaches in the US and in Europe. She also teaches at Harvard Medical School and has been a clinical supervisor for over 20 years. She is a grandmother, and she is also just interested in transferring a lot of this from generation to generation, just being honest and striving for the legacy of racism to be alive inside her and around her. Nancy's awesome as well. I've had an opportunity to train with her, and she's another trainer who I've had an experience. She's open to the conversation, which is wonderful as far as social justice and racism in the community of IFS. So that is Nancy Sowell. And then the last panelist is Donna Young. She is the founder of Black Therapist Rocks, another awesome individual. She's organized, 20,000 professionals to commit to this trauma that is intergenerational and affects people of color. She's also been recruited by Brene Brown to do consultant work and is currently working on her belonging statement to inspire other corporate leaders practice diversity. And Deran is doing a lot. She PAs, she organizes, a collaboration with IFS and BTR. She's a leader, and she's very influential, and another person who I love so much. So those are going to be the panelists. Like I said, I encourage everybody to start being in the Q&A. Hello, everybody else who I've seen the name. I've seen Julie. Thank you, everybody, just for the engagement. So what we're going to start with is, before we even start, right? Before we even start, maybe just taking a moment to just go inside before we start this conversation. And you'll see each of the panelists come up as they speak. And so maybe if we could just take a minute to just go inside and kind of just maybe get in contact and create the safe space for our parts as we go into this conversation. Just thinking about, some of the words that might come up. Equality, injustice, race, oppression. Maybe if certain words are coming up for people who are attending in the audience, maybe just throwing some words out as we start this conversation. What are some words that might be coming up for you, that are in reference to what we're about to talk about, or just, how are your parts doing? How are your parts feeling? So maybe just spend a little time with that. Alrighty. Let's see, I'm actually gonna pop over to the curiosity. Okay, excitement, yes. Let's see, appreciation, open, important, community, celebration, pain, white supremacist culture and white supremacy, yes. Thinking a lot about how race has been used in the country to control. Really glad this conversation's happening. Curiosity, open, hope, yes. Most active part is my achiever. I'm not doing enough. Great. Community healing, open-hearted, tired, truth, colonialism, grateful, responsible, humble. Yes, if I missed anybody, I apologize. It's going so quick, the chat, but this is great, 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 great. Guilt, hope, open-heartedness, ancestral wounds, yes. Racism, all heart, very, very healing. Yes, this is great. Yes, yes, change, legacy burdens, okay. So this is great, nurturing, welcoming communities. Angry parts, yes, yes, this is awesome. Unburdening, connection, guilt, yes. White fragility, yeah. Very great, everybody. This is so exciting, getting engaged with everybody. So why don't we start? I'm gonna pose a question to the panelists, and each one of the panelists are gonna come in, answer the question, and we'll go from there. So, and this goes until 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. Hello from Oakland. Nice to see everybody in the room. So the first question I'm going to ask the panelists to respond to is, what parts have been most activated in your system today, given the current events and the societal calls for greater racial equity and justice? So we'll start there. If one of the panelists can jump in and start with that question.
So I will say that today, actually, like as of today, I'm really struggling with, or have been struggling and wrestling with my self-righteous part. And I remember the first time I heard that phrase and it resonated so deeply with me that I almost, like another part of me was very afraid of it. Like, oh, you know, acknowledging that I have a self-righteous part. It was like, whoa, how can I be this person who's all about social justice and love and community healing, and I too have a self-righteous part? You know, like I'm part of the problem, right? But as I tune into that part and have, like, for the last 2 years really been getting to know it and become curious about it, I realize what it's trying to do for me and for so many people that I care about. It's really trying to you know, promote this place of peace and understanding. And, you know, it's self-like, so it's a self-like part, I would say, and it has a little tinge of anger and aggression and frustration. And what that tells me is that I'm tired, you know, like when I get into that self-righteous part where I feel like I want to force people to see things my way. I want them to, you know, disregard all of their parts and just, you know, just jump into the wagon I'm in, you know, like just believe as I believe, see things as I see them, and the world will be right, right? So again, you know, I realize that that is the same coin. It's a different side of the same coin as white supremacy culture. If I'm dictating what people should think, believe, and I'm not honoring their own unique journey, their own experience, that I believe that's what IFS really brings to this work, is the fact that we have to ask what has happened because of all that's happened. You know, instead of just looking at what we see today and judging it, how can we seek to understand it? How can we really ask that part what it's afraid of? What is it afraid would happen, right? And witness the grief that needs to be healed, in my opinion. So I would say that that's the part that I struggle with a lot, especially because so much of my work is online and social media, and I'm just realizing that, you know, as much as I want inner peace and world peace, or however you say that, peace for everyone, I also believe that the pathway to equality or equity, you know, the fact that everyone is deserving of equal access to opportunities and resources, the pathway to that, I think, is really understanding what prevents that. So that's the part that ongoing part for me. Like I said, I heard this word back in 2018 when the conference theme was self-led activism. And I said this at the conference, I thought all activism was self-led, but I realized that some of us can really come from a place of pain and hurt, and we end up spreading that versus coming from a place of self-energy, of love, of openness, of curiosity, versus blame and attack, judgment, or aggression. So I'll just say that, start the conversation with that, out myself, if you will. Because I also realize that a big part of white supremacy culture is perfectionism, believing that my way is the only way or that there's one right way. And so I'm just really excited to have this conversation with all of you.
Thank you, Durian. And you're getting a lot of subgroups in the chat, and some people saying, hello, Durian. So thank you. Thank you for offering that. Who would like to go next to the question, and let me know if you want me to state the question again?
Well, first thing I want to say is I have a part up that's a little nervous, and because I am not an expert, and I don't see myself as an expert, but I'm just somebody on the path of really wanting to see how white supremacy shows up in me, and to really get clear about the privilege that I have grown up with, that I've lived with. And there's a big part of me right now that I can feel that doesn't want to make mistakes. And I've been dealing with that for a long time. That part that just actually gets afraid of the conversation because she's afraid she's going to make a mistake. And what I tell that part is, first of all, if you open up some space, I can do this, that I'm here with you, and it's okay to make a mistake. The most important thing is to show up and to have a conversation and to be real and to look at it and to look at it in myself, and to not hide and to not run away from it. So that's why I'm here. And I think in my introduction, Requina said that I'm a new grandmother. And what I really want is, I want to be a good ancestor. I want to be a good grandmother. I don't want to pass this on the way it was passed on to me. So I'm really here taking a look at myself and day in and day out. So other parts that I've been aware of are, there's a part of me that feels ashamed of the white tribe that I belong to. And that's hard. That's hard to look at. It's hard to see that in myself. And it's not fun to feel ashamed of myself, of my people, because of the history that and the perpetration that we've imposed on people of color and indigenous people and all over the world. So I'm on this journey to just be honest with myself, and I don't want to skim the surface. I have a part that wants to distance from my white privilege and wants to distance from white supremacy. I have parts that will say, well, I'm not a white supremacist, and I'm not in terms of, the white hood and burning crosses, but I certainly have been steeped in the water of white supremacy, of white privilege, and I have benefited from it, and I want to be in touch with that. So I'm really here, and I want to be in this conversation, and I know I'll make mistakes, and I'm still going to be in the conversation. And I'm doing this for my grandchildren. I'm doing this for the people that I love. And I'm doing this because I believe it's got to happen from the inside out. I don't think there's any other way to do it. I think I've got to look at it in myself, and I have to face, and I have to help the part of me that feels shame. And I've got a lot of compassion for that. I have a list of things. I'm deciding what to say and how much to say. So there's a part of me that has been complicit. And I learned to avoid my discomfort early on with complicity so that I wouldn't be rejected in my family. Because as a young kid, I could see things that I couldn't put into words. And that little part I'm very aware of recently, just a little part that wants to be really, really good. And ironically, the harder I tried to be good or to look good, the further away this work gets from me. So I'm just showing up as a person who is here with my friends, and thank you for showing up. And I feel honored to be here. And I think I'll stop there. And there's probably a whole lot more I could say, but I think I'll stop there. And just thank you for being here. And let's see how this goes.
We have Fatima up next to answer the question. And if any panelists again want me to repeat it, I will. Just let me know.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here. Definitely initially now, I have a nervous part that I can speak for. That's kind of related to an imposter syndrome part, just looking at the fact that I'm on a panel with Durian Young and Chris and Nancy, all of whom have trained me. So I do have a part that's kind of like, what am I even doing here? So I want to speak for that. I think this question of like, how have I been doing it's been asked a lot, and I have parts that run away from it, and then parts that really want to figure out the right answer to it. I think the first 2 weeks following George Floyd's murder, I definitely had a protector that showed up as numbness, and really hid behind me being a therapist. And so those first 2 weeks, this part was like, nope, it's not about you, Fatima, or anything you're feeling. It's about your clients. You got to focus on your clients, and like you'll deal with it after, you get through each week with your clients. And so that protective part was helpful because it kept some feelings at bay. But it was very quickly that I even had clients who were asking me, how are you doing being a Black therapist, and them wanting to know, if they should cancel their sessions with me so that I wasn't doing emotional labor for them. And so that protector got frustrated really quickly because the place where I wanted to go, which was in therapy sessions to kind of hide from myself, I couldn't hide because clients were kind of bringing it up. And so I think after that, I kind of shifted into a, more skepticism. And this part kind of came from, why now? What's different about this murder when these things have been happening for so long? And I think with the influx of people reaching out wanting to know, how I was doing or like what they should be doing, that kind of triggered, I think, more of an angry part. And I kind of went back and forth because I have a very accommodating, compassionate, if people are asking, they're trying to do their best to also, respond to them and give them my best because, they're coming with good intentions. But I noticed I had an angry part that was particularly in response to people who would ask kind of like, oh my gosh, like this is going on. I want to come check on you, Fatima, because it must be hard for you. And the assumption under that was that because, George Floyd being a part of my group dying, that must be hard for me. And my angry part got triggered because it was like, well, the people who killed him is a part of your group. What's not making that association difficult, how you're feeling, or go there, Fatima? What might happen if you just did, right? Classic IFS. And so I think as I sat with all of those parts to kind of, one, allow them to be, and then kind of listening to what it is that I needed first, I was able to kind of tap into, doing different interviews. I felt that once I allowed myself to feel everything, particularly the anger, particularly the numbness, and notice that those are actual parts, it allowed me to almost have a weight off of me, the weight of like saying the right things because people are asking you, people are coming to you for the expert voice because you're a therapist. And so when I was able to lay all of that aside, as you know, have to um, I don't have to buy into anything that anyone's inviting me to. It gave me the freedom to kind of actually choose what is it that I want to feel, what is it that I want to say, and how do I want to show up in this time. Um, and so I've oscillated between, I think, all of those different things at different times. I think what I feel mostly now in this week, or maybe the last couple of weeks leading up to this panel, is a sense of hope. I think I have more hopeful parts that I think I've been cut off from, because hope kind of felt like it was, when you hope for something, it's kind of in someone else's hands. But I think this panel and being reminded of the IFS model, and I mean, the number of people that are on this call who are interested in this work allows my kind of hopeful parts to kind of feel lighter and expectant of a good outcome of everyone, you know, starting with themselves and doing their own work, so that when we come together, there's less undue burden put on other people. So that's where I am. And thank you everyone so far, again, for being here.
Thank you, Fatima. You also have some people in the chat just saying hello. You train with them. Thank you for the point of view that you've brought. And people just agreeing with you. So thank you. And I just want to put out there, this is virtual. And so, you know, we're going to roll with the technology. And so if anything comes up, we're just going to continue the program. And this is what we're working with today, right? In COVID and virtual everything. So thank you everybody just for, you know, letting us know what's going on behind the scenes. I appreciate that. All right, Chris, you're next.
Oh, wow, I am nervous. So I had so many thoughts listening to my wonderful panel host here and co-host. And you know, the first thing I want to do is just acknowledge the people that have been doing this work for a really long time. We lost our Congressman John Lewis, I believe, yesterday, and was listening to his story and how long he had worked. You know, he was talking about, they were talking about his engagement at Selma and being in the hospital and being attacked for standing up. And so there's so many people that have been doing this work for so long. And I'm coming on to this, you know, it's 3 years ago that, you know, I was sitting in a conference and I just couldn't like sitting in my own skin as we were talking about issues of race and racist parts. I was so uncomfortable that I decided I need to look at that, what was happening internally. And that sort of took me on this journey. But I mean, so many people to acknowledge, you know, first acknowledging Deran for, we've had conversations weekly and about this, and it's been a real blessing. Nancy and I had conversations starting the first BTR training. You know, I've been reading Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo and Kate Ingram, and you know, and appreciation for Dick for starting us off on this journey of looking at our own racist parts. So I think part of white supremacy culture is taking other people's work and claiming it as their own and glorifying themselves on the backs of people that have done the work before us. So my parts are really, you know, just sort of coming about this in the past 3 years and trying to catch up and having a voice and having a engagement. What I'm most aware of is that we're at a flashpoint for social change, and we don't have to sort of get this perfect to contribute to public will. And, you know, like so many these flashpoints, time comes and, you know, there's rallies and there's things that are spoken, and then people sort of go back to their lives. And some people can't go back to their lives. Some people, this is their life. And that's what I'm sort of coming to recognize is some people, you know, they're living under these things that my privileges allow me to deny from so much of my life. So, I mean, what I keep reminding myself is we need like 25 to 30% of public will for social change to occur, and we're kind of at that. But we've got to sustain our effort, and we don't have to do it perfectly. Our internal work and knowing our parts allows us to engage it creatively with courage, and allows us to sustain engagement. And I think that's where we're at. We have to sustain engagement in order for really systemic and structural racism and oppression to change. And so working our own parts allows us to sustain that engagement, and also allows us to engage creatively and courageously. And knowing the difference between working on our own internal or personal racism and systemic racism. And my parts are afraid that we'll really get bogged down too much in this issue of personal racism, and lose sight of really the opportunities to really engage in changing systems, and working with our parts so that we can really work systemically. So that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And so with all of the additions that all of you added in regards to the first question, I'm going to open it up to all of you to, add, as far as now that we're talking about this topic, as far as uncovering legacy burdens of racism, what parts of you, feel like they want to speak, be seen as we continue this conversation. And then maybe I can pose another question, after open dialogue, and get to some of the Q&A.
I just want to thank both Fatima and Chris for helping me highlight some other parts that are present for me. Fatima, when you talked about the part that, wants to numb out, because there's only so much a person can take. Like, you don't want to cry every day. I remember after George Floyd was murdered, I cried for about 10 days straight, because I like to think that the work I'm doing matters, and to see a human being be treated as nothing really made me question where we are as a society. And I also want to say, like, that numbness that comes up and is like, nope, we don't want to feel this because we have more work to do, I sensed that as Chris was talking about the death of John Lewis, it's a loss that I haven't really allowed myself to feel. Because then I have to acknowledge, like you said, the fact that he was brutally beaten for standing up for what he believes. And that's somewhat of a privilege that I have, that I can talk about anti-racism work. I can talk about the dream of equality for my son to be treated like a human being with dignity. And that, somehow me acknowledging the pain just feels like a burden that, we don't want to be reminded of what this country really was founded on. I know for me, it's unthinkable when you think of some of the things that have happened historically to people that look like me. Can be really terrifying, to be honest.
Thanks, Deran.
Speak for that part. Yeah.
Thank you. How about other panelists? Yeah, Durian. Yes, the work that you're doing does matter. This is some feedback from the chat, treating people like they're nothing. Yes. Thanks for your vulnerability, some people are saying. Your work is having such an impact. You're allowed to have limits. Your sadness and anger are welcome. Thanks for trusting us with your vulnerability. Yeah.
But what I really want people to hear is the pain. Like, we shy away from the pain. That's kind of what I heard Fatima say. I do that. I hide under the therapist hat. That's why I don't see anyone now, because I'm like, I don't want to hide under that. I want to look at my own pain. I want to look at all the ways that racism has hurt me, and how I, internalized that and lived my life based on white people being better than me. I want to look at it. I want to know, so that I can, help my son with it. I just think it's important.
I would add to, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
All right, sorry for the glitches. That almost to slow down and feel pain it feels like a luxury sometimes, because as we see how extinguishable Black life is, I recognize that I have a part that's like urgent. Like, I don't know how long, I mean, none of us knows how long we're going to be here, but when you see these murders happening so much, it's almost like I find myself thinking about legacy. Like, what am I going to leave here? And I need to get it done quickly because who knows how long I'm going to be here. And to not have that, I think, is a luxury, and that for myself, I think that numbness is strategic, especially when, you know, it could be like, oh, be vulnerable, you should sit with your parts, and it's like, at what cost? Because if I take some time off, you know, what am I going to lose out on by doing that? And that's just this weight that you have to measure all the time, and it gets exhausting.
Yeah. Thank you, Fatima and Duran. It's so powerful for me to listen to you, to hear you, to know you, and I'm just so appreciating you. Other parts that I'm sitting with and that have been up for me the first one that I thought of when I was just thinking about this experience is just the horror of seeing that video, and just reminding me of the horror that's happening all over the world, all over the country every day, and how I've been isolated from that, insulated from that, and how it's possible for me to do that because my skin is white, and because of what I think segregation is a major, major problem. And we don't know each other unless someone in my demographic makes an effort to go out into the world and to be with Black people, with other people of color. It's so easy to live in a white world where you don't have to feel it, where you don't have to acknowledge it, where you can pretend that everything's fine. And I'm just very aware, you know, and I have purposefully gone out and listened to people, and I want to hear you. So I'm saying this to you, Duran, to you, Fatima, but I'm saying this to everyone out there. I want to hear you, and your voices are needed. And me as a white person, I need to hear you, and I need to not stuff my ears so that I don't hear it. I really want to be in the conversation. And so I'm so appreciating you being brave and being here and being real. And I just love you guys, as you know. And I want to hear you. And I also want to be brave in myself to look at the ways that it has infiltrated my mind and my body, and how we all live with it day in and day out, and how I've been living with it. And you know, I have this practice that I do sometimes, is just thinking, like, what if I were Black right now? Like, and that's a helpful thing for a white person to walk around thinking. But I'm doing that, just thinking, like, because I'm becoming more aware. Like, there was something, you know, it's just a very particular time in history that I've never experienced before. It reminds me, I mean, I was old enough through the 60s and 70s to remember some of that, but there's something now that's hitting me in a different way. I don't know why exactly, but there is something happening now. And I really appreciate what Chris was saying, that it's not just, for me, it does have to be a personal journey, because otherwise I'm afraid I'm going to be skimming the surface and letting myself not go really deep with it. But besides that, it does take action, because I'm seeing it. I mean, it's so, our systems are so ensconced in it. And I'm so aware of that. Like, even, it's so interesting that this is happening now that we've got an election coming, and all of this voter suppression is happening. It's like in our faces. The coronavirus, look at the numbers of that. This is because of white supremacy. This is because of systemic racism. And anyway, I just want to say that, and I just appreciate all of you. And I really, the people who are here listening, that I can't see you, but I'm glad that you're here, and thank you for being here. And I know that you are on, if you're here, you're on some kind of a journey too, if you're listening to this. And I'm just grateful that you're here. And you white people that are here, I'm grateful you're here listening and being brave and taking this in. And you people of color that are here, I'm forever grateful to you and your graciousness and your kindness. And really, to me, this is a journey that has to start with some kind of love and some kind of humanity, and just wanting that for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, and thanks, Fatima. I'm just gonna read some of the comments in the chat as we kind of go along. So it's kind of, some people were saying, you know, whites, we have our skin in the game to dismantle white supremacy, Tyler says, and really examine that means for us, what it means for us and the larger system we relate with. So that's one of the things, grieving. Let's see, Fatima, you know, and how you talked about, you know, Mr. Floyd, you know, how did, you know, asking, how did you feel? But I think, you know, that's a part that I think Fatima spoke to, but then there's other comments. I think white people have to do their own work on whiteness and explore with each other, right? Yes. You know, white affinity groups are a great place to start doing some of that work. Some people are thanking the panelists for the courage for the conversation. Let's see some other comments. I'm trying to kind of there's so many comments and I'm just trying to get to them. One of my legacy burdens is the horror of of perpetrating, right? I have perpetrator parts that block my humanity with white supremacist perpetrator parts. Yes, being aware of our parts when it comes to racism. So yeah, I just want to go back and forth with engaging, you know, the audience, because we can't see you, but all these points, you know, are really important. So yeah, anybody else want to jump in on, you know, what we're talking about? Yeah, white affinity groups, definitely.
I would just want to share a quote from the Race Equality Institute, which I think is really prevalent. And I did their training last year, and it was fantastic. I learned more things I never even knew, and I should have learned in school, but I was never taught. So much of this is never taught in school. But the quote says that systemic racism and oppression changes when everyone recognizes the history of oppression and will no longer tolerate institutional policies and practices that oppresses people of color because of their race, gender, sexual identity, sexual preference, nationality. So so systemic racism and oppression changes when everyone recognizes it. And I'm hoping that this is kind of where we're getting to. You know, the way that we change smoking laws is that and this comes from the Race Equality Institution also, is that we got everybody to care about it. People that didn't smoke became aware that secondhand smoke, they convinced us that that's bad for us. If you don't smoke, secondhand smoke is bad for you too. So once everybody cares about it, then we reach this public will, this state of public will, where things can begin to you know, possibly change. So so I'm hoping that we can get to that. We can get to that state of that everyone cares about it, and you know, begins to really not tolerate these issues of systemic oppression.
Yeah, that's something else that I always like to emphasize, that, you know, when people say things like, oh, I wonder how you're doing as a Black woman, I like what Fatima said as, you know, also, I wonder how they're doing as white women, you know, like, I feel like this is a thing that we really are in this together, and the quicker we start to see ourselves as connected and as a collective and as a system, you know, as a country, we are a system and we're operating as parts within that system. The quicker we start to do that, the quicker I think we can realize just how dysfunctional the system is, and, you know, the parts of us that need to heal, and the ways that you know, the reasons why things have persisted the way they are today. who's benefited, who's not, you know, and just really acknowledging that there's pain and there's healing that needs to occur. But I also think that this healing can be done together. I know a lot of people think that or believe this idea that, you know, white people should heal on their own, Black people should heal on their own, but I think that just perpetuates the segregation. You know, like Nancy said, I think that is a core issue, that we need to really embrace each other in the messy middle, you know, and not the unknown. And that's what Brene calls it, the messy middle, you know. Yeah. that, you know, we're not going to have the answers. No one is the expert. We have a lot to unlearn and relearn. And I think that that's where the work is, you know, that we're all just needing to open our hearts and embrace each other. And that starts with embracing all the parts of ourselves.
I would add, I do think that things can happen in parallel. I think that people, you know, thinking about the UTurn and IFS, like this is a moment, if there ever was any, where people can really work with that. I think sometimes it can feel like I want to go do, and the doing feels like it needs to be external. But I think this work, particularly for white people, is, you know, not thinking about the white supremacists as the far most extreme version of it, right? Because racism is overt and it can be very subtle. And so by focusing on using the model, if you will, of how to be compassionate to your racist parts and accepting the fact that it exists in everyone, Black, white, because we're all in a system that has been focused on maintaining white supremacy. So there's no getting out of it. Really, it's just accepting that and starting there of like, okay, this is where we're starting from, how to then lend the model to that. Okay, if I have this part versus, well, I'm not that bad, or, you know, I'm not as bad as my uncle, or I'm not doing all of this. Those are kind of, you know, naturally those parts that are defensive about it, because it doesn't feel good to be wrong. And I think working with that, if you have some kind of resistance, even I think some helpless parts too, right? Like parts that might feel like, oh, it's just too big, I can't do anything about it. Like how is that actually holding up the very system that you want to not be here anymore? And so I think it's a time for people to really start truth telling, but start with yourself. Because you're not really going to be able to do it clearly to your sibling, your family member, if you're not telling, or if you continue to lie to yourself about what's going on. But I think that's the hard part, because it doesn't feel good. It's a hard pill to digest initially. And so I think doing that personal work, and then what we know from the IFS community, the community can hold you through that difficulty, right? So it's not just coming to the IFS groups and doing all of your work and making it messier there. I would say do your personal work, whether that's in your own therapy, whether that's with a trusted friend or colleague, and also be in community at the same time. Because I do think that when people kind of jump in, they do predicate more harm of saying things of, you know, I'm not like this person, I'm not this person, but like they're microaggressions every other sentence that they have. And quite frankly, you know, I know I'm tired and not interested in doing more work for people. So I do think that there can be a balance between the individual work and the community work versus just the community work. I think they're like two pedals on a bike. We need both happening. It can't just be in community, and it can't just be by yourself either.
Yes, this is great. This is great for the open dialogue and the conversation. So I'm actually going to take a moment and get to our question and answers and take a few questions from there, and then maybe we can get into the conversation. But Olga says, we must commit to take social justice work as part of our mission to voice and represent what we care about, rather than letting lobbyists and indifference towards discrimination. So really taking it upon ourselves. That's what I'm hearing Olga say, and making it kind of our own work, right? Like Fatima, you just were saying, being able to look at your own parts and how they kind of show up. Okay, I got it right, Olga, great. So as individuals, looking at our parts, right? Because when we think about racism and systemic oppression and, you know, institutional racism, that a lot of that has to do with parts, if we really break it down when we talk about the model. And so just thinking about that, I'm going to quickly jump over to someone in the chat had asked Chris the program that you referred to as far as doing training. if you can just let people know of that program, somebody expressed interest in that.
Yeah, it's the Race Equality Institute. It's the Race Equity, I'm sorry, Race Equity Institute. My wife has actually given me the correct name for it. So the Race Equity Institute is out of Greensboro. It's been around for around 20 years. And there's a lot of really good trainings out there, but it's one that's really excellent, the Race Equity Institute.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I'm gonna go to the next question from Michelle Walsh. She says, question for Nancy and Chris. How do you witness to the fact that ending white supremacy is tied to your liberation as a white person, the liberation of self, rather than solely for Black, Indigenous people of color? Do either one of you want to answer that?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, repeat that.
It's a beautiful question.
Okay, so Michelle asked, how do you witness to the fact that ending white supremacy is tied to your own personal liberation as a white person? The liberation of self, rather than solely for Black, Indigenous people of color. So
Okay.
as a white person looking at your own self.
Right.
That's
So I don't have an immediate answer, but I'm going to think out loud here with that. If I'm understanding the question correctly, to me, that's IFS, that's when IFS is really, really useful, because as I'm moving through my growing awareness, I'm finding and remembering messages. I'm remembering conversations I've had. I'm seeing my parts that come up, and how I've hurt people, and I didn't know I was doing that. And in order for me to actually do activist work, or to really participate fully and to go deeply, I've got to work with my own parts first. Or simultaneously, I love the bicycle thing, Fatima. Like, so for me, maybe I'm not understanding the question clearly, but I need to witness the experiences that I've had and the experiences that I've participated in. And in my case, often unknowingly, that when I look back now, I cringe and think of things that I've said, or things that I've thought, or things that I've asked of people. And to me, like, getting that kind of painful awareness is important, and it's something I can't shy away from. I've got to be looking at that. And from that comes an awareness and a call to action for me. And also, there's something I want to add to that I think that shame is not a useful tool for change. It's just not. Guilt and shame do not help us change. They help us get defensive. They help us block. And so for me, I have to start with IFS. When I find a part, when I become aware of something, I need to be with that part. I need to listen to it and witness it. And I need to get to the root of how it's protected me, or what burdens it's carrying, and really work with that. And then bring that awareness in with compassion to people, to other people, white people, that need to do that work, that maybe are in a backlash mode versus a desire to actually really look and see. And so it's so important to me to be using language and to be open to people who are not where I am. And I'm talking about white people who are not where I am, and to have compassion for, I have to have compassion for my parts before I'm going to be able to have those conversations with probably the people that I need to be talking to the most. And also being able to say something, so to not be living in complicity. You know, when I witness things all the time, I hear things all the time. And it's so important for me as a white person to be able to speak up to that. And I can't do that if I haven't worked with my own parts. I don't even know if I answered the question. I hope I did, Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, there's no right answer. I think it's based off of your parts. And I love how Michelle asked that question, because it makes me think about U-turning, right? For those of us in the community who know the model, and U-turning when it comes to racism, U-turning when, you know, you get activated around these
exactly.
issues that are really difficult for us. Like, what's going on in there? What's going on in your system, to really understand how you might be projecting or reacting to other people. And it lessens, like you said, the shame or the guilt or the blame. And you get more curious. And that's the wonderful thing when you're able to integrate some of the IFS model and difficult topics like racism. I think it allows more of a fluid conversation and a fluid experience. So thank you for mentioning that. Chris, would you like to answer some of that? The question that was posed, or anything else that's on your mind?
I think it's a beautiful question. I'd love to maybe just sit down and spend 3 or 4 hours talking to Michelle. So we've had really great conversations. I always learn a lot from, you know, being with Michelle. You know, I think it's twofold for me. One, recognizing the way that I was taught to be racist, and I grew up in a very racist community, and my parents had a lot of racism. Recognizing that and not healing it created a moral injury for me. And by owning my parts, so by owning how my young parts were taught, began to heal moral injuries that I carried inside of myself. And then I wasn't afraid to engage in conversations. I wasn't afraid to get it wrong. You know, the first time Deran and I started having conversations, I said all kinds of wrong things that triggered Deran, and we had lots of conversations about it, you know. But I think because I was healing my internal woundedness, I wasn't so fragile that I walked away, you know, feeling shame about it, and I could keep coming back to it. So one is, it's helped me heal my own internal integrity and be able to stand and be present. The other thing I think is I realized by not having connection to other communities and I missed so much. And I often didn't even know how much I was missing. When we did the BTR conference, you know, and I was hanging out with Deran and a lot of other people of color, Requina and yourself and Nancy, like I missed so much of the culture that I didn't even know I was missing and separated from. So being able to heal my own internal racism also gave me access to relationships and connections to people that I didn't have before. And so much is missing. This segregation has caused us to miss so much culturally that people, that we don't even know what we've missed by living segregated. And I think that's what you were speaking to earlier, Nancy, and, you know, is the connections that are formed, you know, out of being able to have these really, you know, challenging conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for that. That's great.
To do a shout out.
Sure.
I want to do a shout out to Percy Ballard. I don't know if Percy's with us.
Percy, are you here? You on the line? I don't know.
Even if he's not, I just want to, I just so love Percy, and he and I have done a lot of talking and a lot of work together. And he's been kind of for a long time a soul voice in a way in the IFS community. And I just appreciate him. I've been thinking of him. I just want to say that. So one of these days he'll watch this and he'll know we were thinking of him.
Me too. Percy's on my list to think also.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know Percy Ballard, he is a IFS trained Black man in the community. So yeah, shout out to Percy. Also, there were some other things that I just wanted to read some comments. You know, some people, as both you, Nancy and Chris, were talking, it's like, you know, moral injury being part of this. White people having to build their own culture. It's going fast. Sorry, I'm gonna try to catch up. White supremacy also whitewashed white people's culture and diversity. Those are some comments that people were making as both you, Chris, and Nancy were talking. And I also just wanted to say hello to Dick Schwartz. He's on the call. Nice to have you join us. And so what I was thinking, if nobody has anything else to add on what we were just talking about, we can maybe go to the next question that will lead us into talking more about legacy burdens. And so I'm going to pose the question to all the panelists. It's like, are any legacy burdens showing up for you lately in regards to the culture that we're in? And if so, what's your awareness as far as those parts showing up? You know, because we're in the thick of it, right? Racism is in front of us. You know, it's not something that we can avoid, that we can, you know, turn our eye, that we can act like it doesn't exist. And we all have legacy burdens. It's just about, you know, awareness. So maybe if the panelists can talk to that, that would be great.
I would love to speak on this one because, you know, this is my favorite topic, legacy burdens. I call myself a legacy burden specialist. Go put a little sauce on it. So I've been teaching about legacy burdens in the continuity program over the last 4 months. And what I love is learning. Like I want to explore this topic so deeply. I want to understand it. I want to connect with it. And I want to understand how legacy burden shows up for others. And one of the things that I have just been really emphasizing lately is this concept of intersectionality. And I was thinking, I was kind of referring back to when Fatima said she was going to be learning from people who have taught her. And I'm like, are you kidding me? She's taught me so much. She's so dope. She's so brilliant. I mean, her brain just fascinates me, to be honest. And the way she articulates and says things to where you can just feel it. You know, like it just deeply resonates with me when she speaks. So this idea that, you know, individualism is one of our collective legacy burdens in America, that one person has the right answer, or, you know, this dog eat dog world where we have to compete and compare ourselves to everyone to be worthy or to be considered, you know, a worthwhile human being. And so I just have been looking for those things in myself, like the intersectionality piece around, yes, I'm a Black woman, but I'm also a heterosexual middle-class Black woman. Right. And I was telling the Legacy Burden program the other day, I was saying, you know, when we don't acknowledge our privilege, we also ignore our power. And when we're able to acknowledge our privilege and our power, we can then empower people who've traditionally been disempowered. So if I can acknowledge, and Fatima taught me this a little bit, you know, if I can, because she said, I'm not a victim. I remember her saying that loud and clear at the conference in 2019, 2018, I guess. We've been doing this for a while. But I heard her say loud and clear, I'm a Black woman. I'm proud to be a Black woman. I am not a victim. And I was like, yes, like that just resonated so deeply with me. So I have to look for the places where I do have power so that I can empower others. You know, if I don't see myself as a victim, then I see myself as someone who is powerful and who has ability to make a contribution to the world. And I'll also say that the work I did with Dick has really been, I mean, the timing was so perfect. If you didn't see the demo that I had with Dick Schwartz, where he helped me unburden a part that felt powerless, I just think that was back in April. And that was so timely because now, you know, I'm having to tap into that power so much. And it's really helping me just explore the ways that our ancestors have given us gifts, right? And how I can use those gifts for not just people who look like me, but for the other people whose experience may be different and marginalized. So I just wanted to say that there's this kind of intersectionality piece that's really important to me these days. And I think when we look at legacy burdens, so Dick says there's 4 main legacy burdens of America, and that's what's kind of helped me shape this intersectionality idea. Those 4 main legacy burdens are racism, patriarchy, materialism, which is what I see as classism, and then individualism is kind of what I see as ableism, ageism, fat shaming, you know, all the other isms is, you know, I want everyone to do things the way I do it. Everyone has to kind of measure up to my expectations and standards. It's kind of how I would definitely define individualism. So I just wanted to share that piece because that's really been important to me lately. It's really been helping me unpack some of my own personal legacy burdens around like poverty. And you know, what's gotten me in the way of not being able to acknowledge my privilege as a middle-class person is because I was still seeing myself as that little girl stuck in poverty. And I think that's another important piece, is just realizing that, you know, we have to stop. And that's why I love the U-turn. When I stop and do a U-turn, I realize that these parts are like children.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm giving them grown-up expectations and roles, and they're like yelling at other people's children. You know, like we're all yelling at each other on social media, and no one will stop and tap into their inner adult. You know, like, let me put on my self hat so that I can actually hear and be heard. So that's just another thing that has felt really important as far as me acknowledging my own legacy burdens and the legacy burdens of others, because as Dick says, racism and patriarchy, so for example, racism is a legacy on a burden on both sides. You know, like the loss that comes with having to be disconnected from other people. You know, patriarchy, same thing. It's like men against women, and it's hurting men just as much as it's hurting women. So that's just been so clear and so important to me recently, and I just wanted to share that. Nancy, what were you going to say? Because I heard you chiming in.
No, I just love listening to. The thing that struck me as I was listening is, I think another legacy burden is scarcity. That there's not enough to go around, and that we're in competition with each other, and people who come to this country in need are somehow going to take away from us. Like, and like, I've got to like hoard everything or keep it for myself. Like, these kinds of legacies are really painful, and they're based on fear. So probably the biggest legacy is just fear, but certainly scarcity, which, you know, if you grew up the way that you and I have talked about growing up poor, and that's, you know, that's kind of inherent in that experience of feeling like there isn't enough, because there wasn't enough. But now there is enough. And the thing about a scarcity model is that it doesn't promote sharing of power. It's like, if somebody else gets credit for something, it doesn't harm me. If I share the power that I have as a white person, it's not less for me. It's actually increases what's available.
Yeah. I'll also say, so something that I learned from Brene Brown, she calls it comparative suffering. I think what I heard you say, Nancy, is when you said, you know, that scarcity mindset takes away our ability to like really tune into what's happening, but it also takes away our ability to be vulnerable. You know, like no one gets to be vulnerable if we're all suffering. And I can't allow you to have a feeling, because there's not enough space for me to have a feeling and you to have a feeling at the same time. And for those feelings to be two different feelings, like it's like an endless amount of space for us all to feel, you know, and if we acknowledge that abundance of space to feel, then we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable and tap into the pain.
That's right.
I love that. Some of the comments in the chat, Catherine said, own your power and move from there.
Mm-hmm.
Joya said, it's a strategy used to divide us, right?
Yeah, scarcity.
Right, and thank you for the people who added the four, the scarcity, the racism, patriarchy, materialism, and individualism, and how that affects all of us. Let's see, Heidi said, scarcity and fear of not enough, you know? And so, yes, definitely. Fatima and Chris, do you want to add to how legacy burdens have showed up for both of you?
I thank you, Nancy, for bringing in this idea of scarcity, because it helped me kind of understand. I was thinking in terms of white supremacy and patriarchy, and it was mentioned earlier that, you know, patriarchy men against women, but I also think that patriarchy pits women against women, particularly, you know, the idea of, you know, well, if I'm a woman in an organization, there's not enough for someone else. And there's countless, you know, experiences of people feeling like women in power, treating the women who are their subordinates in a certain way. And so I think that the comparative suffering that you talked about, even in this conversation about racism and white supremacy, oftentimes it's hard for people just starting out, because they may look in their own experience and say, well, wait, I've suffered. How could I be this thing that you're telling me? How can I have privilege? How can I have power when maybe I'm poor, or maybe I'm a woman and I've faced all of these different things? And I encourage people and myself to always remember that multiple things can be true at the same time. right? It doesn't have to be either or, which I think is a result of patriarchy, of white supremacy, where it needs to be one thing and one thing only. And that's coming from someone who has multiple identities. So I live this all the time, being a Black woman, Black Muslim woman. There's a lot of these identities. So I don't get to say, oh, well, let's focus on the racism, but not on my identity as a woman. Or let's focus on, oftentimes it's, we need to focus on women's issues before we focus on Black Lives Matter. And it's like that doesn't happen for me. Like, it can't be one before the other. And so I encourage people who, as you're grappling with it, just remember that multiple things can be true, and that it doesn't have to be either or, and how it leads to what Nancy said, this idea of scarcity, of why are we pushed to put one thing before the other, right? We are all existing at the same time. What is this pull for, or one needs to lead, versus having that shared power or just a shared voice? So.
Thank you, Fatima.
Yeah, I was relating, Fatima, to this idea of shared power, and also the right use of power. And I think, I mean, one legacy burden I was aware of quite a bit as a senior lead trainer is sort of self-autonomy, you know, or self independence, or you know, not really depending on other people, not self-reliance. So the legacy burden of self-reliance, of needing to be self-reliant and not, and that causes you know, the poor use of power. If you have the burden of needing to be self-reliant, then you don't share power, and you don't allow other people to have their place and have their voice. And I think that's you know, I don't know, as a white male, that's something that's always been, you know, very you know, hammered into me, is to be self-reliant, and to be dependent is to be vulnerable, and working on legacy burdens are related to that, and really leading in a way of that shared power and shared responsibility, and shared voices.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And so as far as legacy burdens, you know, everyone kind of just spoke to that. And I'm actually going to take another question from the question and answer. And I'm trying to keep up with the chat. Let's see. I will get to people on the chat soon, but we have a question in the Q&A. And the question is from Anna. She says, patriarchy seems to be one above white supremacy and racism as far as systems of oppression go. How do I talk about the importance of addressing patriarchy without downplaying how much Black Lives Matter? And so if anybody wants to respond to that question, and, you know, maybe it can be a both and versus either or.
I'm wondering if that question came before we kind of had this last conversation, because I know it sounds like to me Fatima spent a lot of time talking about, like, it doesn't have to be one or the other, and it can be both and. But I also just want to say, like, that comparison, you know what I mean? Like, which one is more important, or which one? I think that's a product of white supremacy culture, that something has to be supreme, you know, and then the truth is nothing has to be supreme. All things can be connected, all things can be considered, and all things can be important. And so just as much as I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman, you know? These are things, I think as soon as I came out of the womb, someone said, you know, it's a baby, a Black baby, in the room of people. I'm sure everyone noticed first that I was a Black baby. And secondly, that I had a vagina. So I think that, you know, these are two very pressing issues, but I think that just the supremacy culture is what drives this need to constantly look for one right thing to talk about, or one right priority, versus a aspect of intersectionality where we can say that we all have differing identities and layers, and that they all matter. And the ones that are not being equitably considered are the ones that we need to consider. You know, when a Black person is dying because of the color of their skin, I don't know that that needs to be something that we argue about priority, you know, because that's, to me, it gets us in a circle of confusion versus clarity around, you know, the fact that these are legacy burdens that we all have to grapple with. What were you going to say, Nancy?
No, I was just listening. I'm agreeing with you. I really like hearing you.
I just don't understand why we have this need to compare constantly.
Yeah,
You know, it's
I'm
like
with you.
everything. And I'm like I said, I've been noticing that within myself. Like, you know, I'm constantly comparing and putting things at odds against each other. And I think it's just a legacy burden of white supremacy culture that has infused our system.
Thank you, Duran, for responding to that. And it makes me think of like the right way and the wrong way, or who's good and who's bad, right? And that cycle, you know, it's like, what if it was and or how do we work together versus a me against you? And that's what I think a lot of the panelists have been speaking of today, this evening. So is there anything anyone else wanted to add to that?
I do. I just want, sorry,
transition toward. Okay.
I'm just going to amplify something Deran said, if I might. Just add, you know, just to go back to this U-turn in the internal work, and you know, our parts perceive threats where externally where maybe there was threats at one time, but that maybe we're not threatened in some ways now. You know, so we perceive like if I share power, then I'm losing something, or I'm giving up something, or that I'm less powerful, or and so the internal work really kind of helps lower the sense of being threatened, and allows us to move more into connection. And I think that the connection is sort of one of the ways through this, is feeling deeply connected. Then we care about everybody, and we care about how our systems are treating, sort of all of the members of our society. So the internal work really sort of, if I see that my autonomy is being threatened in some way, if I work with those parts that see that I've gained far more through connection than I've lost, then that ceases to be a threat. So going back to really working our parts that carry those wounds and carry those threats, kind of helps us, be more in connection.
Yeah. I also like what Requina was saying about good and bad people. Like, I've been really looking at that too, because my whole life I thought, I'm a good person. Like, I'm exempt from a lot of things because I'm a good person. And it's like, no, you're just as human as the next human. But the way I'm kind of internalizing this in my own system is Requina and I talk a lot about the adult children of alcoholics model, and how like dysfunctional families are like the system. And to ask like which part of the system is more dysfunctional is like asking which person in a dysfunctional family is the most dysfunctional. And I love that they look at like the victim triangle, the drama triangle, if you will, and it's like saying, okay, who wants to be the perpetrator today, or who wants to be the victim today? Or, do we really want to look at our parts that center around these angles? Like, part of me feels like a victim. Part of me feels like I'm a perpetrator, right. And really look at the middle of what's being factored into that. Like if we look at it from a self perspective and we see all the aspects, then we can, we don't have to choose a role. We can acknowledge the dysfunction in the family and just say we're all impacted and this is the work.
I love that, Durian. I love that, because then it's going back to parts versus the whole you, and I love that. So I just want to be mindful. We have about 9 minutes left, and I love this conversation. This is a wonderful conversation. I'm enjoying the panelists, the chats, the Q&A. But before we transition, maybe can each of the panelists just maybe say one closing thought? And so we'll do that first, and then I'll do the next piece, and we'll wrap up the panel. Closing comments and any close to action ideas you might have for the audience. So
I'll just do my closing statement. So I just encourage everybody to reach out and get the support they need to keep doing the internal work, help other people. As Joanne Macy says, during times of social change, we need elders to help us not retreat back into fear, and to move forward with courageous engagement. So we need to all stay courageously engaged in the social movements that are happening in our time, and to support each other and support those around us, so that we don't go into overwhelm and can stay engaged. So we need that critical mass to persist and for really systemic change to occur. So encourage everybody to reach out and get support, continue to be in dialogue, and to help your parts not become overwhelmed.
Thanks, Chris. Nancy, Fatima, Deran.
I would just, as a closing statement, kind of circling back to what I started with, of just having a compassionate, honest conversation with yourself, because there can be a lot of self-like parts, as we know, that can come up. There can be, parts that really have an agenda wanting to get it right, and just using the model. And for people who might be new to the model, I think I would suggest reading. So if it's from the IFS perspective, reading books on IFS. We talked about a lot of big topics today: white supremacy, reading books, white fragility, white supremacy, and me, doing the work, because the weight of wanting to figure it out is going to burn you out without action, right? You need to start moving into an action versus the how do I do this? How do I do that? And trusting your abilities. IFS community is filled with a lot of very competent, intelligent people who are business owners, people who have went to school and got degrees. Trust that you're capable of taking a step, right? I think that sometimes racism is a very heavy word that people sort of forget how competent they are in other areas, and try to tap into, okay, if it wasn't racism I was looking up, or white supremacy, if it was something else, how would I go about doing that and applying that? I might read a book, I might read an article, I might go to a workshop, in which you have done. You come on this webinar today. I just think that it's important to recognize that the skills are there. If you've accomplished really, any higher education in your life, you definitely are more resourced than the part that feels helpless is giving you credit for. So take that as a helpful push to sort of move from inquiry to action.
I was gonna say,
Thank
I
you,
love
Fatima.
that. Yeah, I was gonna say, I really love what she said about action. For me, I guess my closing thought would be that one of the biggest actions we can take, one of the most effective actions, is true listening. I think our parts just get in the way of us listening and hearing what people are trying to express to us, and the pain that they're trying to tell us about. So I think, when we talk about self-energy and self-leadership, I just think that listening, true deep listening and connection, are two of the most healing things that we have to offer the system. And I think that does start with, getting in touch with the parts of you that feel like they can't hear or they can't listen, that need to defend themselves. One of the ways that I've been really acknowledging blind spots, as I would call them, things that, we don't know what we don't know. So things that we don't know, and we don't know that we don't know it. We really had to kind of ask for resources. And so one of the resources that Chris recently recommended to me, unknowingly, he thought he was just talking, but he was telling me that he was reading a book called Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. And I started reading this book, and my mind has been blown. Initially, I wasn't sure if it was intended for, a person of color to read this book, but I'm so glad that I did, because it's confirming some of my worst fears, to be honest. When I've constantly, gone around in the world thinking that people believe that they're better than me, and the fact that systemically is true, and all the ways that that's showing up. And it's just opening my eyes. I feel like I'm waking up to being Black. I also encourage, people to wake up to being straight, wake up to being a woman, wake up to whatever identity that it is that we have, and just to begin to explore how that's showing up in our system, how it impacts, other people's experience of our category or our culture, and just listening, like even for men who are frustrated with women, I want to understand, I want to have an open heart and compassionate spirit enough to hear the pain. So I just think that's such a big self-leadership action, is to truly listen to people who are different from you.
Thank you, Duran. I love hearing you. So I have a couple of thoughts. One is to use the model. To use the model when you get scared. Use the model when you get when you feel alone. Use the model when you're experiencing shame. Use the model when you feel powerless. And find those parts. And if you get help with that, if it's hard to do it alone, get help with that. Don't do this by yourself. I mean, I think there is internal work that we do need to do, that we need to turn our attention inside, and we need to find our parts. But there's a community, and even beyond the IFS community, there's community, so many people all over that are really working hard at this. There's tons of YouTube videos, there's tons of books, there's tons of articles. I can't even keep up with it all. And the thing is, you don't have to. Just find what really speaks to you. A book that I'm using right now, it's actually a workbook. It came out in 2020 by Layla Saad, and it's Me and White Supremacy. And it's what I love about it is it taps into what feels to me like a truth. And it's not so much hopeful as it is inspiring. I'm inspired, and it just speaks to me. It's not there. I've been reading a lot of different books, and this one really speaks to me. And it's a 28-day program. And it's, of course, you're not going to heal this in 28 days. I consider this a lifelong journey, but it's a book that's been enormously helpful to me. So that's one that I would recommend. And it's one that it helped me to remember just kind of an innocence or something from when I was young, and how wrong the things that I was seeing and hearing felt to me before the complacency to just get by set in. So that's really been important to me to realize. And what the other thing that I want to say that is happening, that does happen, is just the more you see, the more you see. It's like, just the more I see, the more I see about how extensive, how much I've been affected, how much I'm seeing it all around me, how much I'm just seeing. And the more that I see, the more I realize I wasn't seeing. And be compassionate with yourself. I mean, I don't think I could tolerate it if I couldn't be compassionate with the parts of me that now feel like they were blind and are ashamed of that. But I've got to be compassionate. So I just want to say that. Be compassionate with yourself, because if you're not compassionate with those parts of you that need it, then it's going to be very hard for you to be compassionate with other people who have those same parts. Like I have heard myself as a white person talk about white people as if I wasn't one of them. Right. And so I've got to do the U-turn. I've got to look at it in myself so that I can be with other people in a compassionate way, because compassion is what helps us heal. It's not shame. It's not fear. It's compassion. It's connection. And the other thing that's been so important to me is to have a community of people of different colors and a community of white people that I can talk to too, so that I'm not imposing the work that there is some work I need to do with other white people, but I also need Black people in my life, and I want that. I don't want to live without that anymore. And so get out of, if you're in isolation, there's lots on the internet, start with that, and there's a whole world out there waiting for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists. I want to thank you, Nancy. I want to thank you, Fatima. I want to thank you, Chris. I want to thank you, Deran. I love you all. I also want to just express some special thank yous to the executive director of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, Tawfiq Hakim. He is the person behind that has manage this together. I'm the tech person online today. I want to thank Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, and his brother John Schwartz. I want to thank them. I also want to thank everybody in the audience. I just put something in the chat. Thank you everybody for coming out for this discussion. Like, this is part of the start. This is, you know, where we start to begin to implement some of these call to action, some of, you know, what the panelists have talked about today, connecting with each other, not being alone in figuring, you know, a lot of the, it's difficult what we're talking about, racism. It's centuries worth of, you know, pain, harm, destruction. And so I just want to thank everybody. I also put in the chat, if you have any thoughts or anything you want to add, you can email. I put it in the chat, but I'll give it to everybody as well. It's outreach@foundationifs.org. If you have anything else that you would like to add or express to the foundation who actually put this on today. So are there any last thoughts? I just want to send love and compassion to everybody who's been on, you know, the call as far as the audience. Any last words from the panelists just to, you know, close this out? It was great. This was a great conversation. I appreciate every single one of you.
Yeah, just thank you, everybody, and be kind to yourself.
Thank you, Requina, for carrying this
Yeah,
beautiful job of hosting this and helping us be engaged. Really appreciate you too.
yeah.
Thank you,
It's been
Chris.
great.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, Requina, so much.
Thank you. Until next time, thank you again. Uncovering Legacy Burdens and Racism, the panel that was facilitated today. And we are going to close with that. Have a good evening to everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.